I'm so excited about this. Really, this just kind of came together on right around the time we went to the convention, and I saw that people were getting real excited about this. If you get on Facebook and you look at some of the trending things, say like on the Oklahoma Constitution Facebook page, there were like 200 comments on the Article 5 question, and I just didn't have time to I just had to quit reading them because there were so many comments on there. It's an exciting question, and
I'm just suggesting the overhead projector be taken down.
Yeah, absolutely. Good idea. So I'm excited about this. We have some other ideas in the works. People, we've talked about, having some other debates, maybe one in the fall on a hot topic. And because I think this is really a great way to learn, is just to fairly represent both sides of an issue. I mean, you can't get better than this, because, both guys are here, they're passionate about what they believe, and maybe you haven't even studied the issue, so this is a great opportunity. I'm going to read the debate rules very quickly, and the reason I'm going to read them is because of rule number 1, which is, these rules shall be read before the start of the debate. Number 2 is the proposition. I'm not going to comment, by the way. I have not revealed my position publicly on this question. I don't think I have anyway. I really thought, and I just can't. If I have, I don't remember ever doing it. And I've told 2 people in private about what my position was, but that's it. And the reason for that is because I did want this to be as strictly just objective as possible, totally objective as possible. So the proposition is as follows: should the Oklahoma Legislature apply to Congress for an Article 5 convention to propose amendments to the U.S. Constitution? Senator Rob Standridge is going to affirm that yes, we should, and Bob Donohoo, he is going to be in the negative on that, and I'm going to be the moderator of the discussion. I don't think we've got a small crowd tonight. Everybody looks friendly and happy tonight, but there shall be no noise or other demonstrations from the audience while the debaters are speaking. None of this or that kind of thing. Except for applause at the end of the speech, spectators are asked to remain quiet unless asked to speak by the moderator. Time. Boomer's going to be our timekeeper. The order of the debate will be as follows. The first affirmative by Senator Standridge will be for 11 minutes. Then first negative will be 11 minutes by Bob. Then we'll have the second affirmative for 4 minutes and the second negative for 4 minutes. Then we will have a period of questions from the audience. I have planned to do written questions, and the way we have put it down here, I'll just read it. But the way we plan the questions is, if you have a question, where is it? Questions will be asked by the audience and submitted in writing to the moderator by the end of the second negation. That is, by the time Bob is through with his second speech, I'll give everybody one of these, and if you want to write a question down, you can. Submit it to us, and then we're going to try to submit those questions to them in alternating order. Then we're going to do that for approximately 15 minutes, and then we're going to have a 1-minute appeal from Senator Standridge, and then 1-minute appeal from Mr. Donohoo. Okay? 1-minute final appeal. So, are there any questions about where we're going with all of this?
Question.
Yes, ma'am.
If you're the moderator, do you have someone who, when you get all the submissions of questions, who's consolidating the questions, or are you going to do that as you go?
Well, what I figured I would do, and if this is the first time I've ever done this, so give everybody a question. Oh yes, you did that. Thank you. I was going to just hand everybody a piece of paper, and if you have a question, when you go ahead and have your question in between speeches or something, just hold up your hand and I'll come and get it from you. If it's a question specifically for one of the debaters, write, for Bob, and then write the question, and then we will address it to him, and then the other will have a chance to respond to it. If it's a question, just a general question about Article 5, then just write the question, and we're going to try to alternate back and forth so everybody has a chance to speak first and second. Does that sound okay? Sound like it'll work? Okay. Well, without anything else, then we are going to ask Senator Rob to come up and give his first speech.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much. And by the way, you did a fantastic job at the convention. I was moved by your speech and enjoyed it, and very satisfied with the end results of our new chairman. Senator Brogdon is a friend of mine, and I admire him greatly, and I think he's going to be a great leader for the party. Looking forward to that. So, my name is Rob Standridge. I'm a senator from Norman. I'm a citizen legislator by every definition of the word. Have absolutely no desire for politics until I felt compelled to run. So why did I run? I ran because I have 3 kids. I had 2 at the time, and I felt like the nation's just going in the wrong direction. I think we're in a cultural decline, a fiscal decline, and frankly, I'm not sure how to get out of it. But that's why I ran. I want to make this nation do everything I can in my power to preserve the greatest nation on the planet for my kids and grandkids and your kids and grandkids. So that's my mission. The subject we're talking about today, Article 5, Convention of States, is a way that I see to get there. So I'll talk about that and how I got to where I'm at. First off, I'm very honored to be named Legislator Runner of the Year with the Conservative Index 2 years in a row, but I'm honored by that, but I did not run to be labeled. I have several Legislator of the Year awards, and they're in my drawer at home. I don't hang those on the wall. That's not what I'm there. I don't say things that people want to hear. That's not what I do. That's not how I was successful in business. That's not how I've gotten to where I'm at. I look at and evaluate everything I'm doing, and I try to sow a path to where I want to end up and where I think the nation wants to end up. So how did I get here? Well, you talk about the Constitution. This is the greatest document of governance the world has ever known. And is it perfect? No. We've had amended. The ladies here, thank goodness we did, so you can vote, you can hold office. We've amended it to remove slavery. We've done things to change it, adjust it along the way. In fact, the Bill of Rights, we talk about Article 5, was essentially an ex post facto Article 5 convention, because those Bill of Rights amendments, all 12 of them, were sent into Congress by the states and then sent back out on a promise that they would be ratified later. But the Supreme Court has taken over, as you all know. So where it got me to where I was a big fan of nullification and imposition. I'm not discounting it completely. But when you start looking at nullification, the word nullification is very interesting. It was only mentioned in a draft copy of the Kentucky resolutions. Anybody here familiar with Alien Sedition Acts? Those were some acts that anybody read those, like you were reading another bill. I mean, the Alien Sedition Acts makes that look like child play. I mean, those things so unconstitutional, it's unbelievable. So Thomas Jefferson used the word nullification, but in the final adopted resolution, the word wasn't used. And in fact, even when you look in the version that it was used, it's really only in the grievances. The solution is talking about appealing to Congress by the states to repeal those acts. And there's no talk in there of ignoring those acts. And could we use nullification? This is the things that conclusions I've come to. Could we nullify Supreme Court ruling on gay marriage, traditional marriage, Sharia law, Obamacare? Well, we tried, and it hasn't worked. So we passed the most powerful nullification statement I could ever make. Is I put it on a piece of paper and you vote for it. We've done that 3 times. All 3 times have been overturned, and not an executive branch since the Civil War is going to has flaunted a federal court ruling of substance, and it won't happen. I don't believe it will ever happen. In conversations with Tom Woods, a book I enjoyed, by the way, Nullification. I think Jim gave me a copy or told me to read it. One or the other. Thank you, sir. It's a great book. However, Tom told me on 2 different occasions that nullification is just the statement. So all I can do is make the statement. I don't carry it out. The second floor, the executive branch, uses the mode of what's called interposition to carry out the nullification. And like I said, since the Civil War, executive branch doesn't have the cojones to do that. They will not do it, not in any type of concerted effort. It just won't happen. And we've seen that with the 3 constitutional amendments in Oklahoma I've mentioned. So what do? Well, in response to Alien Sedition Acts, when it was discovered that Thomas Jefferson wrote the Kentucky resolutions, which wasn't discovered until about 1819, 1820, this is what Thomas Jefferson had to say about it. He said the state convention procedure based on Article 5 was the better way to resolve disputes about the balance of state and federal power. He said that in relation to the Alien Sedition Acts. horrific acts that imprisoned people for condemning or for criticizing John Adams, the president at the time. James Madison was a big proponent of Article 5 throughout his life, notwithstanding a letter that some opponents will list you the first sentence in, but I'll read you the whole letter here in a minute. But James Madison, this is an echo of everything he said with regards to Article 5. Should the provisions of the Constitution, as here reviewed, be found not to secure the government and rights of the states against usurpations and abuses on the part of the U.S., is that not going on? That is going on. The final resort within the purview of the Constitution lies in amendment of the Constitution by the states. This is not an isolated. This is his opinion throughout his life. In fact, he wrote a whole treatise on nullifications about 30 pages long, 25, 30 pages long, when people started trying to use nullification to mean what it didn't mean in those resolutions. Alexis de Tocqueville, on his opinion on nullification, one of the most respected historians of the founding era, said it is manifest that such a doctrine would destroy the federal bond and principle and in fact restore the anarchy from which the Constitution delivered us. And this is a similar sentiment. I could read you some much more harsh words by James Madison and Thomas Jefferson on the topic, but I won't do it, because I still believe there is some place for it. So what can Article 5 do? Well, we can have amendments to fix the Supreme Court, balance the budget, solidify states' rights, fix the commerce welfare clauses. Who are some of the people behind this? I know I get criticized for mentioning names, but when you line up history, names are mentioned. So when you think about who's on which side, I'm not trying to be critical of the opponents. I respect them greatly. I think they do a lot of service for the state. But when you think about who's on the side of this and who's against it, we have to think about that. This is a few names. I'll mention a few more. I could mention a lot more than those. So in the debate on the Senate floor, one of my good friends, Senator Mike Mazie from Tulsa, who's probably the most financial genius in the Capitol, I don't think any legislator would argue that fact with me. He mentioned about fearing drags. I don't mean this in a negative way, with all due respect to the opposition. I mean that he describes them, I described a lot of these opposition pieces as things that the John Birch Society never talked about. A lot of the other people, courageous leaders throughout time, never talked about these. Here's a little bit of John Birch Society timeline. Robert Welch was a proponent of Article 5, the founder of John Birch Society. Larry McDonald, the greatest hero of the John Birch Society, was a proponent of Article 5. In fact, we talked about protecting human life. I am pro-life. I hear every pro-life bill in the committee that I chair. Unfortunately, tens of millions of babies are dead today because of a Supreme Court justice by the name of Warren Burger that started a fear campaign to end an Article 5 movement by Larry McDonald, called the Protection of Human Life Amendment. He had gotten it to 21 states. Warren Burger stopped it dead in its tracks by telling conservatives that we may not be able to control the convention. I think that's unconscionable when I look back. Here's it reiterating that point, that if we had not had that fear campaign by Warren Burger, who I don't mind criticizing for that because he's the leftist most activist judge in U.S. history, in my opinion. Somebody said Taney might be worse. I defer. Maybe he's worse, but this guy's definitely in the top 5. Not a conservative by any stretch of the imagination. So here's some of the thoughts. George Soros backs a group called Wolfpack. Don't deny it. He also backed a group in Montana called Montana Budget and Policy Center that fought against Article 5 Balanced Budget Amendment in Montana and won this year. And he directly contributes to that group, and they sent letters out to legislators to ask the opposition why they should fear a convention. So he's on both sides of this. And to say that we can't use a portion of the Constitution because our enemy wants to use it would be like telling me I can't use the First Amendment to profess my faith in Christ on the floor of the Senate. I would do that every day, even though my enemies may use it to criticize. Second Amendment, Vermont, arguably the most bluest state in the nation, has constitutional carry. Not even they would ratify anything curtailing Second Amendment rights. 38 states must ratify. Apportionment, this is one that my good friend Steve Bias told me this is his main problem, is the fear of apportionment. I've got several things I can get to, such as when our states call legislative session. So what an Article 5 convention is a legislative session among 50 states. And our governor in Oklahoma has the power to call a special legislative session, but she has no power to set the rules. And even though she can actually even convene a special session, but yes, she has no power to do the rules. Article 5 is for the states, by the states. It is left to the states intentionally because the states are the ones that wrote the language. So it's up to the states to set the rules and convene the convention, as they did in all the multi-state conventions leading up to the Constitutional Convention. unintended consequences, don't want to go too deep. This is a real concern. I validate this as something we need to look at carefully. Just like when I author a pro-life piece of legislation or I hear one, what are the unintended consequences? Sometimes we have to be courageous enough to say, you know what, we have to move carefully and cautiously, realizing that maybe we may not do perfect, but we need to do the best we can in pushing back against the federal government. Overly divided, alien sedition acts, that would be akin to saying if somebody criticized Bush and WMDs, they'd go to prison. That would have been Civil War 10 years ago. But yet, in alien sedition acts, Jefferson and Madison recommended Article 5. The Madison letter, don't have time with the time coming to read the whole thing, but the opposition will pick out the one time Madison ever said anything negative about a convention. He was talking specifically about the Constitutional Convention. In a nation on the brink of bankruptcy, he said, we do not have time to reconvene. And if you read the rest of the letter, it tells you exactly why we couldn't afford to reconvene. I think it's very important to read everything in context, not pick out and choose just those words that try to bolster your side of the story. So anyway, like I said, I'm committed to pushing back on tyranny. Tyranny is not won in a day, a week, a year, or 10 years. So I'll fight for it as long as I have breath. Thank you so much.
Can we turn this?
Oh, sure. I think sometimes better just to unplug it. Doesn't listen.
Is Bob okay? John, thank you very much. I appreciate everybody here having us out for this whole discussion. You know, Senator Standridge brings out the idea of history and what was done before. Frankly, I like to talk about what's going on today and how we're handling these things today, because I see that as very relevant. For example, let's talk about the rules. Okay, the rules for a convention. Really rather interesting. How many of you have gone to, let's say, the Oklahoma GOP state convention? All right. You know, when you go there, you ever wonder about the rules and how much influence they have on things? All right. How they get used? How about the national convention? You ever wonder, you know, what's going on sometimes? You see, the reality is, who controls the rules, controls the convention. They control the results. They have the greatest amount of influence on it. And that's really the angle I'm coming from, folks, when you get right down to it. For example, at our state capitol, let me give you a summary of the rules, so to speak, that our legislators kind of have to live with. They go, sure, there's a formal process, majority vote in both chambers, signed by the governor. We all get that. We all get that. But what about the informal part? What about even the rules that are made in the past? Okay, the whole idea that, you know, the first thing we do is we elect the leadership of the chamber, and of course, he appoints, if I got this right, he appoints various committee chairs and the whole bit. Now, if you want to get your bill to be heard in committee, because one of the rules is committee chair can just not hear your bill. All right, you just kind of put it in the bottom drawer. So what happens is, if you want to get your bill heard in committee just to get a vote on it, you know, don't you think it makes sense to vote for the committee chair's bills? See, so all of a sudden you get this sort of give and take going on, because there's power through the rules invested in a few. And the many have to figure out how to work on through that. You know, when you see a bill and it's signed by the President Pro Tem of the Senate or the Speaker of the House, you're going to want to kind of lean into that if you want to get your bill through, because any one of them can just bury it. This is the nature of the rules, and that's what's going on. Now, for a convention, should we have a national convention? Our state representatives understand this, our state legislators, I should say. If you take a look here, this year, there were 9 resolutions and bills, here they are, okay, actually prepared by our state legislators. A few of these have actual proposed resolutions in it. But you know what the vast majority of this text is? The rules for a convention. Oklahoma legislators would like to reach through the Article 5 process to set the rules for a convention. All right? They understand. He who sets the rules controls the results. Now, on the other hand, Congress understands this too. They have their own paid research service called the Congressional Research Service, and they put out a report This one's a year ago. I don't think they've updated it since then. I haven't heard. All right. And it talks about an Article 5 convention. Okay, what's going on? And in the middle of all this, they basically say, Senate, House, you guys can set the rules. And in fact, if you go through here, back in the 70s and 80s, the last time it came the closest to having a convention, 32 states had applied. We would look like we were getting close. Congress began to crank up the press, so to speak, and get some rules together. They actually had some bills floating through. They initiated 41, pretty well evenly divided between the two chambers. Okay? And they would have set the rules for a convention. Now, so let's say they go all the way through and they pass, all right, or whatever. Let's just, because none of them have, you know, in Oklahoma anyway, at least not at the federal level, right? Let's say they do. How do you decide who wins? Because they do contradict each other at points. Okay, how do you decide who wins? Who decides who wins? Supreme Court? Supreme Court? Right? Isn't that where something like this would end up? Great. Do you want to trust the Supreme Court when it comes to dealing with the issue of a constitutional convention? I don't. You see, that's a great unknown. This is where all the risks come in. All right? In addition, this year, Senator Standridge authored a resolution and a bill. The resolution is the application of a convention. The bill here is to set rules, okay? In governing even our own delegate or delegates, should they go to a convention. For example, it'd be a misdemeanor if they violated our instructions. Well, kind of cool. If they're guilty of a misdemeanor, they can be recalled. If they don't get recalled, they can be arrested and brought back for trial, so to speak, right? And then another delegate can win. Here's the resolution. It's a way of the state kind of making sure they get their wish. Here's the problem. This year, the bill, it passed the Rules Committee, and then it went no further. And all you had was a resolution. Resolution goes over to the House. Of course we inform our legislators. Hey, your accountability's gone. This still moves forward. This is not the first year this kind of thing happens where the accountability gets dropped, but the application stays in place. There's a pattern already created. Fortunately, our House had the wisdom when they finally put the title and the enacting clause back on, and they were no longer being generous because they knew it was kind of not the real vote. It went back on, and they shut it down, 42 to 56. It happened this last week. Now, the bill's still alive because they actually rescinded the third reading, which means they kind of pretend like that vote didn't occur, so they can bring it up again next year. Is really the intent behind the whole thing. So now, here's the issue, though, dealing with reality, okay? When you're dealing with this whole question of the state setting rules, Congress setting rules, and the special interests right now that have so much influence over Congress, the East Coast establishment, all those groups and everything, that give us such grief because they harvest our liberties and turn them into profits is what they do, right? They're going to reach, I would predict, they would reach right through Congress and do the same thing with the convention. That's the risk. That's the risk, folks. And the states don't have the ability to counter that, okay? It's all right here. Are we going to trust that to the Supreme Court? The risks are high. Let me tell you something else. About 45% of the state's budget is federally funded. So who has control over who? Let's face it. Who's got control over who? Until we get underneath that knot, get out from underneath that juggernaut, we got a problem. Nationwide, about the states, on average, about a third of their budget comes from federal government. We actually exceed the average. It's a problem. There's something else too. You know, delegate selection. Okay. Oklahoma, comes time to select the delegates. Remember the power of the leadership that I just brought out before? You want to get your bills passed, you better keep leadership happy. They have their bills, and you know them because they author them, right? So you got that little thing going on back and forth, all right? Well, a lot of the power resides in the leadership. Think about it. President pro tem. Okay? See this right here? This document right here, go look at the website. It is his donors, his PAC donors. Imagine corporate PAC donors. Let me read them off here. You see who they are. Healthcare industry, construction, energy, all these various PACs contributing tens of thousands and tens of thousands of dollars to his campaign. Okay? Let me ask you something. Who do you think he's going to pick? How do you think he's going to influence the process? When these folks realize that a convention is real, that it's going to come around, do you think they're going to remember, hey, Senator, I give you $5,000. I give you $2,500. You know who I think would be great as a delegate? By the way, do you have career ambitions? This is the real world today. That's what I'm bringing out. This is the real world today. This is the risk of having a convention. As long as we are so beholden, as long as our elected officials and our state government is so beholden to all these special interests, they have a major hand, folks. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson aside. Who is the influence today? John?
Thank you, Bob. Well, I know Bob's main contention is the rules, and I understand that. I disagree, but I'd like to talk through that with you for just a minute. One is, I think everybody's agreed here that we need to do something, right? I think when you look down through the Declaration of Independence and you read those grievances, I bet it would be familiar with you today that what the federal government is doing. So when they send their officers to harass us and to manage the state, micromanage the state, you talk about your tax dollars, they do come back here from the federal government with lots of strings on them. We can do nothing about that until we put the federal government back in the place as the child. Right now, we are the child. That is not how the founders intended it. It is not how the Constitution intended it. And that's why we need to repeal the 17th Amendment. We need to have a balanced budget, and we need to have term limits to put the federal government back in the place as a child. Until we do something against the federal government, all we're doing is just wasting air, in my opinion, with all due respect. We're not doing anything. And with regards to the rules, you talk about all the bills they propose, not even Congress, who definitely wants to control this, not from the perspective of special interests. They want to control it to kill it. Absolutely. Why would they not? In fact, I've already heard indirectly from Lucas and Cole that they are concerned that we might actually have one, because now we're to 27 states, 2 in the last month. Oklahoma is not one of them, unfortunately. But the 41 bills he talked about, here's what Supreme Court has said time and time again, the last time in 1952. When the Congress fails to adopt or pass a bill, they describe it as Congress has refused to adopt that method. It actually makes it weaker. And I guarantee you Congress would never have the gumption to try to pass a law to control this convention. They would never do it. Another thing is, he usually mentions Dillon versus Gloss, is what you usually mention. I was surprised you didn't mention that Supreme Court decision, because that's one of the very few that talked about Article 5 convention. And what Dillon Gloss actually says is that if the founders during the Constitutional Convention or the ratifying conventions did not express an opinion about something with regards to Article 5, then Congress may have some power. So the only thing that they actually made a decision on in Dillon Gloss that went outside anything within Article 5 was that there would be a natural deadline for amendments, for ratification. I think the year was 7 years, if I remember correctly. Well, that has been vacated by the states, because does anybody know when the 27th Amendment was passed and proposed? Well, it was proposed as one of the original Bill of Rights, and it was passed in 1993, which vacated the only substantive decision in Dillon Gloss. But the substantive part is that if the Constitutional Convention or the founders or the ratifying conventions made an opinion, which they did, by the way. Thomas Jefferson or Alexander Hamilton, certainly no states' rights guy, in Federalist 85 said that Congress shall call a convention. Nothing in this particular is left to the discretion of the body. None of the multi-state conventions, 32 of them leading up to the Constitutional Convention, including the Constitutional Convention, Congress never had a role. never had a role at all. And they would not, because this is a states convention for the states. And if states don't stand up and do something, then we're done. I know trust is a hard issue. I know I'm a state representative. I'm in there now. I was out and distrustful just like you before. But we're the last line of defense. If we don't do it, if you will not allow us to try to push back against the federal government, my opinion is we're toast. I sincerely believe that in all of my heart. And if we do not do something, we sit back in fear of dragons raised by the most activist Supreme Court judge in U.S. history, we're toast. I mean, this is the guy responsible for killing tens of millions of babies, and we're going to put him on the side with us? That doesn't make any sense to me. Let's reevaluate where this fear came from. Let's reevaluate it, clean the slate empty, and rethink it like Larry McDonald, Ron Paul, Rand Paul, and Robert Welch and those people did before all of this fear campaign began. That's what I would ask you to do, is reevaluate without that. I got finished before the right time.
All right, okay, let's talk about solutions. This is the funnest part when you get right down to it. We have several solutions, and they're great, just so you know. The difficulty with the Constitutional Convention is that the only end result of that is we modify a document. We're not following it now, to a large extent, so many different areas. So we modify it again. Where are we going? Nullification definitely has its place, but it requires strong states, okay? And we don't have strong states right now. There was a state senator I went to a couple of years ago with a bill on nullification, and he said, Bob, my constituents won't back me up. His voters. What do you do? Now, by the way, the state has actually passed a nullification law. When you consider the Real ID Act, Senator, the author was Randy Brogdon. The year was 2008. The state, or the federal government, kind of sent an Instagram, so to speak, but that's all they did. Now, beyond that, let's talk about the real solution. And please send the paperwork out. The real solution is buried in here. I actually encourage and train folks to become activists. Okay? Citizens become an activist. And part of the process of that training is something we call the power of 500. 500 citizens engaged in the process some way or another become the single most influential factor in determining who their next congressman is going to be. That's the power of an engaged citizenry. They even trump a lot of money, all the media buys that the heavy-end donors want to contribute because they're buying, they're carving away their liberties for the sake of money. The volunteers even trump all of that. I want to break that down. If you were to take a look, 2 minutes. Let's take a look at our state senate. Let's say you have 500 people at the congressional level. That's 50 at the state senate, 25 at the state house. And you come along now, and let's say each one of these people, let's say you had a popular, the state house, 25 people, all right? Now, they went to 100 primary voters in their neighborhood. Who are they? I'll give you the list for free, folks. I got it. Okay, I'll give it to you. 100 primary voters, and once a quarter, they drop a little pamphlet, let's say, on their door talking about liberty. And you leave your name and address on there, okay, is what goes on. How many of those households do you have to move? Of those 100, how many do you have to move so that in the 2014 election, the runner-up takes first place? Well, all you got to do is take the margin, cut it in half, and add 1, right? I know it's very simplistic in that sense, but it's explained here in this document. Rather academic, too. I realize it's going to be a little heavier in reality, right? What would the margin be? Well, let's take the first one, Joseph Silk, open primary. Of 100 households, how many would those people need to have switch their votes? The answer is 1.1. 1.1. Roger Thompson, 1.5. You know junk mail rates for conversion, so to speak? 2%. Because it's 100 households, these are percentages. Okay. We can do better than that. Folks, if you run on down here, for an open house or for an open seat, the percentage you need to move is in the lower single digits. For an incumbent in a primary, it's the higher single digits out of 100. We can do that. We just need to reach out to our friends and neighbors. We can restore a nation. We're actually that close. I'll get into more of it later if you want. Then, when we're engaged, nullification will begin to work because we're behind our people. All right? We'll get the right people elected. Local level going to federal, and a constitutional convention will not even be necessary. Why? Because the problem is not our Constitution.
Any more questions anybody wants to submit before we ask these guys to answer a few for us? Okay, we have a time limit, of course, so we may not get to all of your questions. Thank you. But we'll ask as many of them as we can. We're going to try to do them in alternating order as much as we possibly can. Okay, now the rules on this, of course, are 1 minute per question for each of the speakers, and I'm just going to call on one, and like I said, we're going to try to go back and forth if we can. So, Senator Standridge, first one will be for you. On your chart, Senator Standridge.
It's not my chart, by the way. I don't even know if I've read it.
It reads, "It is an accepted fact that Congress has only the authority to call the convention." He says that on that chart. Where does Article 5 state this limitation?
Good question. Excellent question. Kind of goes to what I was talking about a minute ago. Well, the beauty part of Article 5 is if you could put yourself in 1787, I think it's a lot easier to understand, because when George Mason talked about why this amendment was needed, and it was in the Virginia plan as well, it was talking about how Congress it was not appropriate for every amendment to have to go through the national legislature, which is what they called it at the time. And so George Mason and James Madison concurred that it would not be appropriate if Congress was involved in that decision. This provision within Article 5 is specifically designed to circumvent Congress. I'll read Federalist 85 is just one example. It's echoed throughout in the mention of sovereignty with regards to Article 5 and I would refer you to a five-volume set of books called The Founders Constitution, actually free online, that you can confirm all this. And I do not take things out of context, but I'll read. Federalist 85 is long, but this section pretty much talks about what the role Congress has, and it says, Congress shall call a convention. Nothing in this particular is left to the discretion of that body.
Time.
That is not my words. That's out of the Federalist Papers, and that's what Supreme Court will refer to, and Congress.
Okay, notice what Senator Standridge does is he refers back to precedents from 200 years ago. And yet, what I'm concerned about in the rulemaking process is what's going on today. For example, here's Senator Standridge's corporate PAC donors. The whole list. Okay, it's right here. Tens of thousands of dollars in the last election. Okay? Who do you think is going to have the greatest influence, even over Senator Standridge?
Are you saying that I'm influenced by my donors?
Excuse me, it's my
God, yes.
Wow, that's a bit slight.
So, there's a reason that, folks, we know the reality. We know the reality. Do I need to answer that question? Even if Senator Standridge is not, what about all the others? Now, with that said, Senator Standridge, how about, I'd like to ask you not take corporate donations the next time around. How about at least corporate donations through PACs from out of state? Would you agree not to take those? You have plenty of them in here.
Time.
Okay, next question is, we'll start with you, Bob, this time. May a state rescind or withdraw its application?
What happened in the 70s and 80s is as the count got up to 32, all right, states did begin to rescind their applications, and it seemed to be accepted by Congress because they ceased their activities to continue to pass laws. Even the Congressional Research Service says that basically Congress waned in their support for the whole thing. They lost interest, so they didn't go forward with it. So right now, recent precedents, the last time it occurred, the answer would be yes. And what happens in the future? I don't know. I mean, what if people change their mind? You know, I mean, it's not like we've had a convention before, you know, under Article 5.
I'll just, on the record, I have never personally attacked anybody on the opposition, and it seems to happen quite often from the other side. But I'll tell you, if you want to enter into politics, you have no business in politics, because the people you mentioned that you admire in office All of those people have received money from PACs and individuals. I am not unique in that. And I don't receive anything at all with thinking that that's going to affect my vote. I have no business being here. Fire me tomorrow if I would do that. I don't appreciate that insinuation. With regards to rescind, I've actually commended Senator Brogdon on rescission at the time, because at the time there was no momentum. And so I would not want to have these resolutions, applications sitting there, not knowing the time we're in. But today we have 69 of 99 legislative bodies in this nation controlled by Republicans. And whether you trust us or not, we are in a window of time similar to 1865. If we don't do it now, this window may be gone and we do not have the opportunity to do it again. So today is an opportunity. I put a 7-year sunset on the resolution that I proposed, both of them in the House and the Senate, because I think that window of time will disappear. And we will look back 20 or 30 years from now and say, what did we do? Why didn't we follow the Constitution and the instructions our founders gave us to push back against a tyrannical federal government? That's the question we will need to answer for our kids and grandchildren.
You guys are going to need to restrict your times.
Okay, next question. So we started with Bob last time, so we'll start with you this time. It appears that neither the Convention of the States or nullifications are doable or supported. Now what? What are each of your constructive solutions beyond the Convention of States and nullification?
Thank you. Excellent question. The question that I asked myself before I got elected and every day since. So what I'm looking for as a successful business person is solutions. I've gone to national meetings of Assembly of State legislatures around the nation. There's been up to 35 states at those. I do believe a convention of states is possible. I don't think it's our only option. I think it's doable. And those states that are represented there want a balanced budget, term limits, and repeal of the 17th Amendment. That is absolutely the only thing that's ever discussed in any venue that I've ever been in. Now, there are some groups out there that want to do something different. That's their option. They can do that. I'm open to other suggestions. There's 27 states that have applied for this. We only need 34. We can get to 34 without Oklahoma. I would think that would be unfortunate. But it'll probably get there without Oklahoma. So if you want to continue block, that's fine. But I think we ought to seriously be looking at our options. And I'm for nullification, but the constitutional amendments, there's nothing stronger than I can do, and all three have been overturned and are now nullified themselves.
Time.
Power 500 actually answered that question. It's us. We the people need to rise up and get engaged. It doesn't actually take a lot from where we're at when you get right down to it. Contact your neighbors. You know, I actually bring in dozens of people every year, a couple dozen people every year into this process. And I'm just one person alone actually doing this. This is very achievable. Reach out to your neighbors, get engaged enough to help to assist bills get passed or kill bad bills. Tell your neighbors your war stories about your success on that. They will be impressed that you know the system as John is teaching it, and they'll want to join you and get engaged. If you just talk about the problems, your neighbor's going to trump you and ignore you. If you talk about the solution, they will get engaged. And until we get enough people engaged, these corporate PAC donors and the whole bit, they're going to trump. They're going to trump. By the way, talk to Representative Jason Murphy. He has won by the largest percentage margin on this sheet about corporate donations.
Okay, so this will be for you, Bob. And this question, this question was actually for the Senator Standridge, but because we want to make sure we alternate, who pays the delegate expenses to attend the convention?
Oh, my turn.
Yeah, you're gonna lead with this if you don't mind.
That's
Assuming
actually
we came to that point.
Yeah, that is one of those details where the states may well want to pay, and then the Congress may well want to pay, and the whole bit. And I haven't really gotten into a lot of that. It doesn't say in Article 5, so it's a matter of detail, as the Supreme Court calls it, okay, in terms of how to actually work that out. Yeah, that's what their decision on the Dillon versus Gloss and the whole bit, because that is something that has to be worked out, and I don't claim to have the answer on that. Keep in mind, we haven't actually done it, have we? So a lot of these variables are unknown. But I'll tell you something. Back in the day, in 1787, we had the Constitutional Convention and the state ratification conventions afterwards in the various states. Who paid the salaries and all, whether it be the counties or whoever, the cities and communities that sent the delegates, or the state did, actually had a bearing in the politics of the ratification at each state in terms of what's going on. Interesting read on the history. Manipulation wouldn't be unique to our day, folks.
Excellent question. Excellent question. It's up to the states. I personally don't think that we need a Delegate Limitation Act, which is the bill he described, but I offered one because I want people to be comfortable with the process. It is up to the state legislatures to do this. I took out reimbursement out of mine, as I do every bill that comes to my committee. I always strike any type of reimbursement out of it. I don't believe the state should be reimbursing citizens or legislators, for that matter. The question, though, is when you look back in time and you look forward in time, what are we going to do? I mean, I don't mind the grassroots effort. I'll help. I'll volunteer. I'm for everything that can turn the federal government around. I was elected to do that, I feel. Every porch, every doorstep I knocked on said the same thing. And it's incumbent upon me, it's incumbent upon the states to stand up and use the power that we were given. If we don't do this, you will never trust us enough. I guarantee it. We're human. We're fallen too. If we're going to wait till the perfect world arises, it will never come. So we have to do something. It's incumbent upon us to do something. And I promise you, I assure you that I will keep fighting.
So this question will be for you now. Why do you continue with your resolution once your penalties bill was not ever heard?
Good question. Again, I don't necessarily believe that we need a DLA because of the penalties bill, but I support it to make constituents more comfortable. But there's no reason running that until we do the resolution. I have assured everybody that it's not dead, it's laid on the table. I will bring that up as soon as we pass a resolution. There's no sense passing that and causing more confusion about that before we pass the resolution. But of course we should pass a DLA. 18 states have passed one that have called Article 5 conventions to make their people feel more comfortable. But the trust level, we will never be perfect enough, I promise you. We weren't when I was outside, and they're not when I'm in there. But unless we do something, I think our days are numbered. $18.5 trillion in debt and counting faster than you can possibly imagine. If we do not do something now in this window of time, we only have ourselves to blame. And when we look back in time and wonder what we did and we did nothing, only we are to blame for that. Only we are accountable. And this window of time will not go on forever.
Thank you.
You know, the whole issue of penalties, the reality is Congress, one of the laws they proposed back in the 70s and 80s, Supreme Court decision. So let me ask you something. What do you think will happen, even if we do get a balanced budget amendment?
Excellent question. I mean, I will agree with Bob on one score. Congress will never pass an amendment or send an amendment out for ratification that will curtail their own power, ever. The founders said so. Everybody since then has said so. Ronald Reagan said so. That's why he supported Article 5. Most recently, Senator Mike Lee from Utah, probably the most conservative senator in the U.S. Senate, proposed a balanced budget amendment to be ratified that would go through the process in January 2013. It never got a hearing. He has said it's up to the people, as Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, and many others that you probably have a high regard for. They realize that unless we do it as states and people, we're not perfect. I'm fallen just like you. You will never trust me enough. We will never have a perfect scenario. But if we do not stand up and do something, we will have failed our children and grandchildren. And to do so under irrational fears is not appropriate. There are certainly real concerns. But we really need to look at this from a blank slate and quit listening to Warren Berger and other people like that have got us into such a tizzy over something that the founders intended us to use in this very circumstance.
All right. Thank you, guys. Appreciate that a lot. All right. So we're going to have a 1-minute final appeal by each of them. And then after that, we will be done. Stick around and ask some more questions. Or, like I said, were some questions we didn't get answered tonight. But we appreciate y'all being here so much, guys. It is a tough question. As you can see, there's a lot of passion on both sides of it. But I'm happy that now you have the information and you can go study it. And we're better equipped to make our own decisions. So, Rob, if you'd like to give your final appeal now.
Sure, absolutely. Well, once again, thank you so much for having me. It's lovely riding down here in the rain because we need lots of rain. So thank you, God, for delivering us some liquid sunshine. But this is an important issue. This is not something that we should take lightly at all. Absolutely, I'm not suggesting that. But what we have upon us today is a decision to make going forward. Tyranny wasn't conquered in a day. I don't care if this takes my entire life. I will not stop battling against Washington, D.C., because that is the problem. It's not the people there, it's the system that has been created over the last 5 to 10 decades. And the 17th Amendment must be repealed to give power back to the states. A balanced budget amendment will help. Is it a cure-all? Absolutely not. But the most important thing is states must rise up. And so this Convention of States under Article 5 is, to me, in my heart, is more about states rising up, because we're getting beaten down in every other way. We're getting to a number now that is making Congress nervous, I promise you. And if we got to 34, they'd be shaking in their shoes, and they'd be coming to talk to us about what the heck are you guys starting to do over there. So states need to be the parents again, not the children.
Thank you so much.
The reality is we, the people, need to rise up. We need to reach out to our neighbors and our friends and get them engaged. Until then, regardless of the mechanism that's chosen, if we're asleep, the mouse is going to steal the cheese. It doesn't matter which mechanism you choose. It's just the reality. We have no choice. That is really our only and best option, is to get our neighbors engaged, come out to groups like this. This room should be double. Think of the topic. This room should be filled to a maximum and should be in a different hall. This is just a reflection of we the people. Now, Senator Standridge, I believe to be a noble gentleman. I like Senator Standridge. Outside of this measure, he has a very, very good voting record. But you know something? Those corporate donors, they're a matter of public record. They're there for us to see for a reason. We are to think critically about the influences on each one of us and how we'd respond. I'm actually worried about the leadership of our various chambers. What would the leadership at the federal level do?
Thank you very much. All right, well, thank you for being here next month, the last Monday of the month at 7 o'clock. I don't know what it'll be in May, right off the top of my head, but Lord willing, that's when we'll meet again, so I hope you'll join us for that. And appreciate again these guys joining us. Thank